I like bedtime routines to be short and consistent. So bedtime routines are almost more, I don't want to say more important, equally just as important as they would be with an infant for a high schooler.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to Baby Steps, sponsored by Oxford and Soho Baby, a podcast dedicated to exploring the personal and emotional journeys of parenting. I'm your host. My name is Medea. Today I have Allison, certified pediatric sleep coach and founder of Sleep and Wellness Coach. Allison, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Let's get right into it. So, how much sleep do children actually need at different ages?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think I vary, but my recommendations are a little bit different than the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I don't have their recommendations right in front of me. But mine are typically higher. And so when I think about how much sleep children need, I'm really focused on how much sleep they need to thrive, meaning be their very best little self.
Mhm.
And so, the newborn stage is so wide and varied that I try not to get quite as hung up on it at that age, other than they need a lot of sleep. You don't want them to have super long wake periods. You want them getting frequent sleep during the day and obviously as much sleep as humanly possible at night. But a real turning point is when you get into that kind of 18 to 20 week mark. And that's when babies have more developed circadian rhythms and more developed sleep cycles, meaning there are more phases than there are in the newborn phase. And so once we move into that range of between 4 and 5 months, I'm really looking for 3 to 4 hours of day sleep total spread across 3 naps, and then 11 to 12 hours at night. And then going forward, that 11 to 12 hours really sticks for far longer than I think a lot of parents realize. So, as a point of reference, I do have one child who has higher sleep needs than the other, but that child will be 12 years old in July, and she still gets over 11 hours of sleep ideally. So she plays travel sports, and we don't always get to bed on time for her to do that because obviously she goes to school, but she's still capable of getting 11 and a half hours and being her best little self. So sometimes when we have 3 year olds who are really good nappers, they might slip down into that 10 and a half hours at night. But a lot of the kids for a very long time stay in the 10 and a half to 12-hour range. And then obviously naps reduce over time as well. But the big reduction in nighttime sleep actually happens when kids go into early puberty.
Okay, yeah, because 10 to 11, that sounds like a lot. But
Yeah, it's a
I guess,
lot.
yeah, kids need a lot of sleep.
They need a lot of sleep to be their best little selves. It boosts their immune system. It helps with, as you get into toddler stage, it helps with emotional regulation. It helps with impulse control. It helps with learning retention. There are just so many benefits to sleep.
Realistically, how many kids actually get that much sleep?
That's a great question. I don't think nearly enough.
Hmm.
So, families that work with me end up on that train and they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. There's such a difference. But there's so many people who are not getting that guidance, even from their pediatricians. So, even I remember when my daughter was not sleeping well as an infant, I remember them saying, if you could just try to get her 10 hours of sleep, well, she really needed 11 and a half at night. But that the guidance was try to get at least 10 hours. So I don't, that's a great question. I don't know how many kids get that many, but they can. They're capable of doing that. But some kids will need to be guided towards being able to sleep that well, that long.
So, when you mean by guiding, is that like training, like sleep
Yeah.
training?
So I like to say that kids are born with varying levels of natural sleep talent. And I compare it to athleticism. So if you go out and see the 3 and 4 year olds on the soccer field, you get a real glimpse into their natural athletic ability. Some of those kids look like they popped out of the womb knowing how to play soccer. They're super athletic. They're running, they're fast, they're taking the ball coast to coast. That's the one end of the spectrum. And then your other end, I say is the child who's still kind of uncoordinated walking and they're picking dandelions on the sideline. They have zero interest in playing sports. And then you have everything in between. And sleep is similar. So most of us have a friend who said, I don't know, I just put my baby down and they slept. I don't know why people think this is that hard. That's the very naturally inclined to sleep baby. And then the far end of the spectrum is the mom who says, I could literally never put my baby down. I could not put them down. They wouldn't sleep flat. They will only do contact naps, and it's very hard to get them to fall asleep despite our best efforts. So that's the other end. And then there's everything in between. If you have a child where it's not their natural gift, then they will need to be taught. And when I say taught, it might be the skill set of being able to put themselves to sleep and back to sleep, because if you can't put yourself to sleep initially, you won't be able to put yourself back to sleep. And then another big piece of the puzzle, which I guess isn't really teaching them, it's more of us putting together the puzzle, is aligning sleep to their rhythm. So when sleep is not their natural talent, they're often more sensitive to their circadian rhythm and the timing of their sleep. So one of the ways that we can naturally help children sleep better is start to nail down, well, what is the best time for them to take nap one? What's the best time for nap two, for nap three? What's the best bedtime? And that leads to a whole nother confusing thing that's out there is the concept of wake windows. And wake windows are not supported by science whatsoever. And so when you have a child who's struggling to sleep, one of the ways I guess we quote teach them, if you're working with me, is we ditch those wake windows and we start to figure out what sets their body up for success.
Okay, so like trial and error.
Yeah, with timing, there's a little trial and error of tracking data of, okay, when we put them down at 8:45, they're able to fall asleep easily and they connect sleep cycles. So they can get an hour to an hour and a half nap, for example. Versus if sometimes it could be like 9:15, so not that much later, it's hard for them to fall asleep and they'll only nap for 30 minutes. So there is a little trial and error to nail down the start times, and then there can also be the piece of the puzzle of teaching them to put themselves to sleep and back to sleep, which would be a little bit more of traditional sleep training that I think most people think of when it comes to teaching their child how to sleep.
Okay, and how does food affect this?
Mm. Food can have a big impact on sleep. So when we think of infants, and I think of feeding with them, the first thing I think about is rhythm, and bodies thrive on rhythm. This is true for you and me as well as children. And so when we think about feeding infants, usually I say it's ideal once you've gotten past the establishing your breastfeeding or the early bumps of establishing what your child is going to eat if you're doing formula and you feel like you have a good grasp on it. Trying to get on a little bit of a schedule can be helpful as far as they eat every 2 to 3 hours instead of, every 30 to 60 minutes. So snacking can make sleep challenging versus having a little bit more of a rhythm. And then something that can impact sleep negatively that doesn't always get connected is food allergies or food intolerances. So that can have a negative impact. And so sometimes I'll be working with the family and we'll be doing the things where I 99% of the time see improvement on sleep. And if we get a handful of days in and we are not seeing the improvement, I often say, let's hit pause. Let's go back to your pediatrician. Let's explore if there could be some intolerance in the food department. So sleep and food feeding can definitely be connected in a multitude of ways.
Yeah, I didn't think about the allergies because, yeah, if your child is struggling with an allergy, of course that's going to keep them up.
Yeah, and not even allergies. I think intolerances. So allergies often, I think, are a little more clear to us as parents versus the intolerance, where it's not that they're clearly unwell. They're not vomiting, they may not have a rash, but it just, if you ate something that didn't sit well, it could certainly make it harder to nap or go to sleep at bedtime or cause a middle of the night waking.
Wow, that's interesting. Hmm. Why is sleep so critical for brain development in kids?
I think one thing I've been happy to see over the last 10 years is that we are now appreciating how much sleep is critical for all of us. So, for all of our well-being, sleep is pretty crucial. It's when your brain kind of cleanses out what has happened for the day. It's when a lot of things reset. So your immune system, it's when things if you just take your toddler, they're learning something new. That skill starts to get cemented when they sleep. So when I teach classes, for example, to elementary school parents, I often talk about how sleep primes the brain for learning and how your child is able to take in what they learn in class if they go into the classroom well rested. So their brain is prepared to receive it. And then when they sleep after learning, the brain stores it away. But that's also true for the younger kids. Think of all the things that our infants and toddlers and preschoolers are learning. It's like the fastest rate of learning. And sleep makes all of that easier. And a lot of the families I work with, their children are in daycare, and getting good sleep when you have a child who's in a group care situation can really help with their immune system and keeping that strong. So there's just a lot of benefits for sleep.
Yeah, sleep helps everything and everyone of all ages. It helps you focus, helps your memory. It's so good for you, and
It
people
helps
should
you
get
take
more of
on new
it.
things. So even
Yeah.
when kids are adjusting to daycare or a preschool or any type of new situation, I always say if you can send them well rested, just like you or me, it's easier to take on a new challenge when you've had a good night of sleep.
Yeah. I definitely see that in my life, so I know for a child it's
Totally
even more
agreed.
important. What happens to a child's behavior when they're overtired?
Are you thinking like the toddler
Yeah.
preschool age group? So the research that I'm always intrigued by is around napping for the toddler and preschool group. And I'm a big advocate on not only getting those 11 to 12 hours of night sleep, but also protecting that nap. And sometimes when kids aren't sleeping well at night, I think parents become very tempted to drop the nap to see if they can help with the night sleep. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But if we just take the nap for the preschool age group and the toddler group, there's pretty clear research that it helps with emotional regulation. So you just think of kind of less tantrums, less crying.
Yep.
It helps with impulse control. So there's that, it's age appropriate for kids to hit and, rip toys out of their little friends' hands. Yes, but that's also impulse. Like they're impulsive, they don't really think it through. So kids who are struggling with behavior, the hitting behavior, um, just general, and as kids get older, not thinking before they act. Sleep is really powerful for that. And then that learning retention. So those are just three key areas where I say, what parent doesn't want that? What parent doesn't want their child to have more impulse control, better emotional regulation, and better learning retention? Which, as you already stated, if you think about that for you and me, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the same for us. We are
Mm-hmm.
less cranky when we get sleep. We are able to focus and learn more. So we also have better emotional regulation and impulse control. We're less likely to snap at someone because we think it through a little bit before we bite their head off. So it's actually very similar to you and me.
Yeah, everyone is less cranky when they get sleep, but adults are better at hiding it, I feel.
Yep,
But toddlers will just act how they're feeling and you see the tantrums.
exactly.
Well, I guess this question, I'll still ask it. How is children's sleep different from adult sleep, if at all?
Yeah, it's different in the fact that they need more of it, that the timing of bedtime is earlier. So maybe that'd be a helpful thing for parents to hear about is when you think of their circadian rhythm and their natural biological sleep rhythm. So what time is ideal for them to go to bed and what time is ideal for them to wake up? It's helpful if it's around the same time each day. That is similar to you and me. That's how you optimize the circadian rhythm. But their natural pull to sleep is noticeably earlier than in adults. So there are multiple phases of sleep where infants and young kids, even now into elementary school, have a much earlier natural pull to sleep. I often say it's a lot of times around 7 p.m. Then as they go into puberty, that starts to shift later. When they get into kind of the high school years part of puberty, they shift past the average adult. So they go from catching to what the typical adult sleep bedtime would be to then passing us, and then they swing back. So
Mm.
there's a shift in the optimal circadian rhythm as far as like when they have their strongest pull to sleep and natural desire to go to bed. So kids have a much earlier natural pull to sleep, which plays into them needing more sleep. I mean, that makes sense. The only way we can get them more sleep is if they're wanting to go to sleep earlier. And honing in on that time is important. Like for me, after I became a sleep coach, I sleep was never my natural gift. I really improved my own sleep. And part of it was paying attention to what time I should go to bed. And if I go to bed at between 9:30 and 9:45, which I do not always do because I joke that I need my mother here to parent me and tell me to go to bed. But if I do, I will fall asleep easily and I will not have my 3 or 4 a.m. wake up that where I'm wide awake. But if I stay up past 10, I've caught a second wind, so I could now take on a project and work till 11:30. I don't really have a problem falling asleep late. I'll fall asleep, but then I'll wake up between 3 and 4 and I'll be wide awake because
Hmm.
I'm out of alignment with my rhythm. And so that's a big difference is that young infants and young children have a much earlier natural pull to sleep. And when they fall to sleep earlier, the quality of their sleep throughout the night is going to be better.
And part of it is sleeping at the same time every day, right? That's what I've heard.
Yeah, so you want to be around the same time. The reason I'm hesitating is because I do believe in a rescue bedtime. So if you have a child who, let's say, needs 3.5 hours of day sleep to be their best little self, and they have a day where they only get 3 hours, you could put them to bed 30 minutes early and make up for that missed day sleep.
Oh,
So I
that's so
call it kind of a
interesting.
rescue bedtime. And so we want consistency, but where consistency becomes the most important for young kids who still nap is we want the morning wake time to be fairly consistent and we want the nap start times to be consistent. And so then the one area we have to make up for sleep if we're short is by doing the bedtime a little bit early. But you want to have a standard bedtime and then a rescue bedtime for those days that are off because our kids aren't robots. We have lives. We aren't going to have every day be perfect. And so you can do a 30 to 60-minute early bedtime to make up for missed sleep if you need it.
Interesting. And what is like an ideal bedtime routine for a toddler, let's say?
Yeah, I like bedtime routines to be short and consistent, and they really don't need to change that much from infanthood till forever. It's basically still the same for my kids. So you can do a bath. I think baths are optional. They're not required. So you can do them some nights. You don't have to do them every night. So you don't have to get too hung up on the bath. And then jammies, sleep sack, feeding if you're still doing a bedtime feeding. But ideally, if our long-term goal is being able to put themselves to sleep, we don't want them falling asleep on the breast or on the bottle for that final feeding. So feeding with dim lighting on. Then a book if we're thinking about the infants. For a toddler, you could be 2 or 3 books, but don't go beyond 3 books. And then sing a song, get tucked in, the end. So short, simple, consistent.
Okay, that sounds nice. That's making me sleepy.
I know,
A
right?
nice book. Okay, so you'd say that would be for toddlers to, because high school would be different, right? High school, they put themselves to
Yeah.
sleep. So would you still
Yeah.
recommend a bath and all of that?
Yeah. So high schoolers are interesting because we really, for them to get enough sleep to thrive, they are going to have to go to sleep ahead of their natural circadian rhythm because their rhythm now is super late, but they also have to get up early for school. So bedtime routines are almost more, I don't want to say more important, equally just as important as they would be with an infant for a high schooler because now, in a sense, we're working against their body's rhythm. It does not mean they can't fall asleep earlier, but it does mean you need to be a little intentional. So it can be shower if they want to shower in the evening, but it absolutely should be no screens Big believer in keeping the screens out of the bedroom. It'd be really great if we all did it. Sometimes I go on bouts of doing it, and I need my mother to parent me because my sleep is way better when my screen is not in my room at all.
Hmm.
But think about cutting the screens out of the bedroom and then having that shower, wash the face, brush their teeth, just that little wrap up process. And then reading. So my kids, I have them read. So they get in bed and read. Sometimes we'll read a book together where they're reading some, I'm reading some. It still can be a bonding time with your child if they enjoy that, but otherwise have them read. Sometimes for our teens who struggle to wind down, we'll do 10 minutes of stretching. So that can also regulate the nervous system and slow the heart rate and prepare their bodies for sleep. So 10 minutes of guided stretching. I love the Peloton app for some guided stretching, and so does my 13-year-old. And then some kids are open to meditation. So a guided
Hmm.
meditation, a 5-10 minute guided meditation can be helpful for those teens. Mine, not into that. I love one, but she doesn't. So you also kind of have to figure out what helps them relax and wind down and then have that rhythm. That's what cues the body to get ready for sleep for all of us, really.
Yeah, that routine is so important because it tells your brain, okay, it's time for sleep. So when you meditate, okay, it's time for sleep. So it's really important to have that.
Exactly.
Final question. What advice would you give to parents listening right now?
I would say that there's no one right way to parent. If there was one right way to handle anything, including sleep, we would all be doing it. And so, one thing I just want all parents to know is there's no one right way to do it. You know what is best for your family. Don't let someone tell you you're getting it wrong. If it doesn't feel right, you shouldn't be doing it. And that you matter just as much as your baby or your child. And so, particularly for your new parents, if you are struggling, you deserve to be well as well. And so I do think it's really important. I'm a big advocate of parents' mental health, and I think sleep can play a piece in that, and that our children can really thrive not only with sleep, but when they have parents who are doing well as well. So I always like to remind my new parents that your health and well-being matters just as much as your baby's, and not to get totally lost in this whole parenting thing.
I love that. That's all we have for today. Allison, thank you so much for coming on. Listeners,
Thank
thank
you.
you for tuning in. You've been listening to Baby Steps, sponsored by Oxford and Soho Baby. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
You've been listening to Baby Steps, sponsored by Oxford and Soho Baby. If you're in the market for a new crib, glider, dresser, or more, we'd love for you to check out our line of furniture. Head over to oxfordbabyandkids.com or sohobaby.com. All links are within the show notes. For more information as a listener, enter the code PODCAST10 for 10% off your total purchase, plus free shipping on all orders over $799. Thanks for listening and tune into our next episode. Bye for now, and remember, every step is a step towards progress. We hope today's story gives you the confidence and the assurance that every journey is different, but we do it together.